Today, we are undertaking a truly a monumental deep dive into an icon whose career was cut short at 32, yet whose global influence just seems to grow exponentially with every passing decade. Bruce Lee.
That's so true. When you think of Bruce Lee or, a Lee Jun-fan, you immediately picture that unforgettable intensity, the lightning-fast kicks, and, of course, the yellow tracksuit of the film legend.
Absolutely.
He is the undisputed dragon, the icon who single-handedly launched the martial arts craze in the West. But our mission today is to look, well, beyond the spectacle.
We want to understand the complex, the intensely philosophical man, the controversial figure, and the revolutionary thinker who distilled a lifetime of combat knowledge into a single, cohesive, hybrid philosophy he called Jeet Kune Do.
And we have a wealth of detailed source material here tracking his evolution. We're going to trace his path from a privileged but, troubled child actor in Hong Kong who was constantly fighting on the streets to the controversial martial arts demonstrator in the U.S. who really offended the establishment. We'll unpack the philosophical genesis of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, which is, it's the true blueprint for modern combat sports.
And crucially, we will dedicate significant time to grappling with the enduring ambiguity surrounding his sudden, tragic death at the height of his fame. We'll be examining the official verdict alongside the newest, most compelling medical theories that have emerged in just the last few years. It's a deep dive into the question: what did it take to create Bruce Lee? And what exactly ended him?
So let's start at the beginning, and it's a beginning that is already more complex than most people realize.
Okay, let's unpack this journey, starting with a fundamental, often overlooked detail about his birthright.
The very first surprising nugget of knowledge is that Lee Jun-fan was born in San Francisco, November 27, 1940.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S. And this is absolutely crucial because his location of birth immediately granted him U.S. citizenship due to what they call just solely laws. He was Hong Kong American before anyone even knew the name Bruce Lee.
But his American residency was, a few months?
Very short-lived. His family returned to British Hong Kong just 4 months later, April 1941, and he grew up in a remarkably privileged environment. His father, Lee Hoi-chuen, was a highly successful Cantonese opera and film actor.
So he was basically born into show business.
Literally. This positioned Bruce within the entertainment world from birth. His first role as an infant was being carried onto the stage in the film Golden Gate Girl.
So this wasn't an aspiring actor climbing the ranks. This was a child of the Hong Kong elite already appearing in films.
Exactly. He had star quality immediately. He even took the Chinese screen name Li Sulong, which means Lee the Little Dragon.
The Little Dragon, right.
It was a nod to the fact that he was born in the hour and the year of the dragon, according to the Chinese zodiac. And by the time he was 18, he'd been in over 20 films. He was a bona fide star, but his life was anything but smooth.
Now, you mentioned complexity regarding his background. We think of him globally as the symbol of Chinese identity, but his lineage was highly contested, and that fact would shape his entire life.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the hybrid identity that defined his philosophy later on. The sources highlight this ongoing, heated debate about his mother, Grace Ho's, heritage.
What was the common story?
The traditional consensus, the one often cited by early biographers like his wife Linda Lee Cadwell, was that Grace Ho was of Chinese and German ancestry. Linda even stated that Bruce's grandfather was a German Catholic immigrant.
Okay, so that already gives him a mixed identity.
Yeah.
But you say new theories complicate this even further.
They absolutely do. An alternative theory, which has been gaining a lot of traction, asserts that Grace Ho's father was actually a man named Ho Kam Tong.
And who was he?
He was the son of Charles Maurice Boesman. Now, Boesman was an incredibly wealthy Dutch-Jewish businessman from Rotterdam who served as the Dutch consul to Hong Kong.
Wow.
Boesman had a Chinese concubine, Si Tai, and Ho Kam Tong was one of their children.
So we're talking about potentially Dutch, Jewish, English, and Chinese ancestry, depending on which theory about Grace Ho's parentage is correct.
Precisely. And this mixed heritage, especially that perceived European background, was the reason Bruce Lee experienced such intense discrimination in his own home city, particularly when he tried to get martial arts training.
That takes us to his initiation into the fighting world. He started with his father's Wu-style Tai Chi at 7, but the real turning point was 1953, with Ip Man's Wing Chun school.
Yes, he was introduced to the school by his friend William Chung, and this is where that mixed identity became a huge roadblock. According to Chung, Lee was initially rejected.
Rejected why?
The reason: the martial arts community in Hong Kong had a long-standing rule not to teach foreigners.
He was considered a foreigner in Hong Kong learning a Chinese art because of his mother's lineage. That's just astonishing.
It is. It's an incredible level of xenophobia. And it continued even after he was finally accepted. Most of the other students soon refused to train with him once they learned about his mixed ancestry.
So Bruce Lee, the future symbol of Chinese pride and power on the global stage, was seen as an outsider by his own peers.
An outsider, simply because of who his mother was.
That kind of hostility must have channeled his energy outwards. The sources detail that he became deeply involved in Hong Kong's notoriously violent street culture.
Oh, absolutely. He was drawn into the bare-knuckle rooftop fight scene. In the 50s and 60s, if rival martial arts schools wanted to settle a score, they'd often meet on the rooftops of buildings to avoid the colonial police.
No rules, I imagine.
No rules, total chaos. And Lee was a frequent aggressive participant.
And it was in this environment, combining his structured Wing Chun training with the chaotic reality of street fighting, that he began his early sort of rudimentary process of hybridization. He learned very quickly what worked and what didn't.
He definitely learned necessity is the mother of invention. But he wasn't just relying on his fists, he was also formally training and competing. In 1958, he won the Hong Kong school's boxing tournament.
Right, he knocked out the previous champion.
Knocked out the previous champion, Gary Elms. And just to show his multifaceted interests, that same year he secured the Crown Colony Cha-Cha Championship.
So he was a star dancer and a brutal boxer.
Exactly. The perfect combination.
That combination of discipline and explosive energy sounds like a ticking clock, and eventually the street fighting became too much for his family to handle.
It did. The incident that proved decisive involved him beating the son of a feared triad family so severely that the police got involved.
That's a serious escalation.
Very serious. His younger brother, Robert Lee, recounted the detective delivering an ultimatum to their father. Your son is really fighting bad in school. If he gets into just one more fight, I might have to put him in jail.
That's a stark choice for a family of their standing.
It was. So in 1959, his mother sent him back to the U.S. to claim his citizenship. He arrived in San Francisco, working hard immediately, first as a deckhand and later moving to Seattle. He hustled, working as a live-in waiter at a restaurant to pay his way.
But the moment he landed, he started teaching. This was the inception of his formal teaching methodology.
Absolutely. He began teaching martial arts under the name Jun-fan Kung Fu, literally Bruce Lee's Kung Fu. It was his personalized approach to Wing Chun, heavily influenced by the speed he needed in those street fights.
And what was so revolutionary, and a direct response to the discrimination he faced in Hong Kong, was his selection of students.
Yes. His school was racially diverse from the very start. He welcomed his first assistant instructor, Taki Kimura, who was this Japanese-American, and his first student, Jesse Glover, who was black. He was teaching everyone.
And this Seattle period is where we see the first true fruits of his technical innovation.
Precisely. The famous one-inch punch was developed here. It's a remarkable illustration of focused energy transfer. But critically, he immersed himself in other combat disciplines.
Like boxing.
Especially boxing. He became fascinated by the footwork, rhythm, and speed of fighters like Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson. He realized that the structured stance of Wing Chun was just too stationary for a truly dynamic fight. He studied Ali's movement meticulously.
It's important to remember that he also pursued formal education during this time, and those intellectual pursuits profoundly informed his approach to fighting.
He did. He graduated high school and enrolled at the University of Washington in 1961. And while his official major was drama, his real intellectual passion lay outside the main degree.
What was he studying?
In his junior year, he took crucial classes in psychology and philosophy. These subjects, the study of the mind, of movement, of human nature, became the intellectual bedrock for his lifelong philosophical interest, and eventually, Jeet Kune Do.
So, he arrives in America, a street-tested fighter and a gifted student of philosophy, ready to challenge the status quo. Let's fast forward to 1964. And the Long Beach International Karate Championships, which served as his dramatic coming-out party.
This event, arranged by American martial artist Ed Parker, was like an earthquake in the traditional martial arts world. Lee was invited to demonstrate, and he did not hold back. He understood the power of spectacle.
The showcase was purely designed to prove that the human body was capable of things that traditional arts claimed were impossible, right?
Exactly. He performed his two-finger push-ups, using only his thumb and index finger on one hand, feet shoulder-width apart, a phenomenal display of core stability and focus strength.
And then came the one-inch punch.
The one-inch punch.
For anyone who's seen the footage, it seems to defy physics. How does it even work?
It's terrifying because it breaks all the rules of a normal punch. He would stand upright, his fist just an inch from the volunteer's chest. The physics relies on the kinetic chain, the rapid acceleration of the hips and torso without the telegraphic windup of a normal punch.
So there's no warning.
No warning at all. He delivered the force almost entirely through core rotational strength, focusing all that energy through that tiny 1-inch distance.
And the results were visceral, especially for Bob Baker, the volunteer.
Baker's recollection is key to understanding the sheer power involved. He said he was launched backwards onto a chair, and he recalled saying, "I told Bruce not to do this type of demonstration again. When he punched me that last time, I had to stay home from work because the pain in my chest was unbearable."
So it wasn't a stunt. It was a devastating display of internal power.
Completely. And this phenomenal demonstration was immediately followed by what amounted to an ideological challenge to the assembled traditional martial arts community.
He called them out.
He did. Lee used this platform to launch a direct public critique of classical karate and kung fu styles. He argued that they were too formalized, too rigid, and spent too much time practicing katas and prearranged sequences that were useless in a real chaotic fight. He advocated for a massive modernization.
I can only imagine how well that went over with an audience of traditional masters.
It caused an immediate schism. Some were totally convinced by his power and his insight. Others, particularly in the Chinese community, were deeply offended, and this public critique, combined with his decision to teach non-Chinese students, led directly to the challenge fight that would forever change his life.
The legendary and intensely disputed fight with Wong Jackman in Oakland later that year. This event is the singular catalyst that moved Lee from practicing Wing Chun to creating Jeet Kune Do. We need to frame this as the personal existential crisis it was for him.
It absolutely was. The stakes were incredibly high. According to the version told by Lee, his wife Linda, and his associate James Yim Lee, the Chinese community issued an ultimatum. Bruce must stop teaching non-Chinese students or face combat to settle the matter.
So it was about race again.
It was. And Lee, who had just experienced that same racial discrimination himself, flatly refused. This led to the challenge from Wong Jackman, who was a well-regarded master.
And what was Lee's account of the outcome?
In Lee's version, it was a rapid, decisive victory. Linda Lee Cadwell recounted that it was a no-holds-barred fight that lasted about 3 minutes. Bruce overwhelmed Wong, got him on the ground, and forced him to submit. The implied message was clear. My way is better.
But Wong Jackman's version paints an entirely different picture of the stakes and the outcome.
Completely different. Wong denied the ultimatum entirely. He claimed he challenged Lee only after Lee boasted publicly that he could beat anyone in San Francisco, which Wong found arrogant.
So professional pride, not racism.
According to Wong, yes. And his account of the fight suggests it lasted an unusually long 20 to 25 minutes, ending not because of a decisive blow by Lee, but because Lee was unusually winded and exhausted. Wong even claimed Lee attacked with the intent to kill.
So we have two accounts, a 3-minute knockout or a 25-minute exhausting draw. Which one is right?
The beauty, and perhaps the tragedy of this moment, is that the specific truth of who won doesn't matter as much as the impact it had on Bruce Lee. Even if he won in 3 minutes, which is what he claimed, he was severely unhappy with his performance. He felt the fight lasted too long, and that his traditional Wing Chun stance had failed him. He realized his movements were too slow, too rigid, and that he needed much more stamina.
That moment, that profound disappointment, forced him to look at his fundamental approach to fighting and declare it obsolete.
It was an ideological breakup with his foundational art. It initiated a relentless, intense pursuit of innovation. He essentially told himself, if the art I learned is failing me in a real fight, then the art itself must change. This crisis immediately spurred the philosophical revolution that led to Jeet Kune Do.
While he was undergoing this revolution, he was also pursuing his acting dreams, landing the role of Kato in the TV series The Green Hornet in 1966.
This was a pivotal moment. It was produced by William Dozier. And crucially, Lee fought tooth and nail to ensure his fighting style was authentic. He successfully refused to perform the typical American-style fighting that producers often favored.
So no big loopy punches?
Exactly. He insisted on using his explosive Wing Chun-inspired movements and often had to slow them down because the film cameras of the day just couldn't capture the speed.
And The Green Hornet, though short-lived, was historically groundbreaking.
It was the first popular American show to present Asian-style martial arts to a mass audience, even if it was in a sidekick role. It also established his critical Hollywood connections. This is where he connected with the judoka and professional wrestler Jean LaBelle.
Right, the grappling expert.
Yes, LaBelle worked on the set, and they began exchanging knowledge. LaBelle taught Lee grappling, and Lee taught LaBelle his advanced striking techniques.
When the Green Hornet was canceled in 1967, Lee channeled all of the intellectual and physical energy from the Wong Jackman fight into formalizing his philosophical system. This was the birth of Jeet Kune Do.
JKD, or the Way of the Intercepting Fist, was designed to be the ultimate synthesis of combat knowledge. The core principles were practicality, flexibility, speed, and efficiency. It wasn't about learning a catalog of moves, it was about learning how to process a fight and intercept the opponent's intention.
The hybrid approach is what makes JKD so famous, incorporating elements that were considered, well, radical for traditional martial arts masters at the time.
Absolutely. He grabbed techniques from every corner, boxing footwork for mobility, the explosive kicks of kung fu, and even the linear direct attacks found in fencing. The whole idea was that the ideal fighter should be able to instantly adapt to whatever style the opponent presented.
A massive shift from the rigid, stylistic approach of the past.
A total paradigm shift.
Yet, despite naming it the Way of the Intercepting Fist, he famously regretted giving it a name at all. Why was that?
Because the name Jeet Kune Do itself, no matter how elegant, still implied a boundary, a definition, a limitation. His entire philosophical goal was the transcendence of all limitations.
The style of no style.
The style of no style. This is why the essence of JKD is captured in the Chinese phrase on its emblem. Using no way as way and having no limitation as limitation, it was designed to be a mirror reflecting the opponent.
His teaching expanded in Los Angeles, bringing him into contact with some of the biggest names in Hollywood.
He taught an incredibly high-profile list of students: Chuck Norris, James Coburn, Sharon Tate. And these connections allowed him to continue exploring film concepts. He collaborated extensively with screenwriter Sterling Silliphant on an unproduced film called The Silent Flute.
He also made a memorable cameo in Silliphant's film Marlowe in 1969.
Right, where he basically demolishes an entire office. He was showcasing his skills as a hoodlum.
The success was building, but the next turn in his career brought him face-to-face with the structural racism of Hollywood in the early 1970s.
That's the story of the Kung Fu controversy. Lee pitched his own TV series concept, a Western titled The Warrior, about a martial artist roaming the American West.
A great concept.
A brilliant concept. Warner Bros. Loved it, but notoriously retooled it, renamed it Kung Fu, and handed the starring role to David Carradine, a non-martial artist.
And the excuses Warner Bros. Gave for passing over Lee have become legendary.
They have. Warner Bros. Officially cited Lee's thick accent as the reason he wasn't cast. However, the feeling among many, including producer Fred Weintraub, was that the decision was based purely on the perceived business risk of casting an Asian man as the lead in a major primetime American series.
A racial barrier he just couldn't break at that time.
Exactly.
And what was Lee's personal, very measured response to this profound rejection?
He demonstrated remarkable foresight and pragmatism. In a 1971 interview, he said, "They think that business-wise it is a risk. I don't blame them." He went on to say that if the situation were reversed, he'd have his own concerns. He understood the marketplace, even though he was rightfully disappointed.
It was producer Fred Weintraub who then gave him the key advice that changed his life and launched his global stardom.
Weintraub realized Lee's raw talent and marketability were being overlooked. He told him to go back to Hong Kong and make a feature film, a global box office success that would be undeniable to Hollywood. And Lee took that advice, completely unaware that he was already a massive star back home.
How was he already a star in Hong Kong without a leading film role?
Remember the Green Hornet? While it was short-lived in the U.S., it was an absolute sensation in Hong Kong. They called it the Kato Show.
So Kato was the star.
Kato was the star. When Lee arrived in 1971, he was shocked to find himself instantly mobbed and recognized as the lead of a hit TV show. He immediately signed a contract with the production company Golden Harvest.
And his very first film cemented that stardom instantly.
The Big Boss in 1971 was an instant, colossal box office success across Asia. It shattered records. He followed that up just a year later with Fist of Fury in 1972, where he played the national hero Chen Zhen.
And that broke the records again.
Broke the Big Boss's records. Lee had achieved the kind of global stardom through Asian cinema that Hollywood had claimed just wasn't possible for him.
His next move was to prove he was not just an actor, but a complete filmmaker.
That was The Way of the Dragon in 1972. Lee took complete creative control. Writer, director, star, and fight choreographer. The film is famous for that climatic battle in the Roman Colosseum against Chuck Norris.
An iconic scene.
That showdown, often called one of the best fight scenes in martial arts and film history, was meticulously choreographed by Lee to highlight the contrast between a rigid karate style and his fluid, adaptive JKD.
The financial returns must have been staggering to get Hollywood's attention.
Oh, absolutely. Sources estimate that Fist of Fury and Way of the Dragon collectively gross hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide. That success forced Hollywood's hand, leading directly to the American-Hong Kong co-production, Enter the Dragon.
Enter the Dragon, 1973. The peak of his career, a joint production between Concord, Golden Harvest, and Warner Bros., and yet a success he never fully saw.
The film was made for a surprisingly tiny budget, just $850,000. It was released 6 days after his death and became an astronomical phenomenon.
The numbers are incredible.
Sources estimate its worldwide gross, adjusted for inflation as of 2022, is equivalent to over $2 billion. It was the film that launched the global kung fu craze and cemented his legend.
Simultaneously, he was working on his fourth Golden Harvest film, the famously unfinished Game of Death.
Yes. He had shot over 100 minutes of footage before production paused for Enter the Dragon. This footage is iconic because it's where he wore the now legendary yellow tracksuit.
Which wasn't just a fashion choice.
Not at all. It was a functional one. Producer Andre Morgan noted that the yellow suit was specifically chosen because it allowed the footprints from a kick to be clearly seen on film, highlighting the combat action.
And Game of Death has its own tragic, controversial legacy after his death.
It does. It featured sequences where he fought his real-life students, including the 7'2" and NBA star Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But director Robert Close controversially finished the film in 1978 using a look-alike. The tragedy is that only 15 minutes of the original footage Lee shot made it into the final film.
Such a sad footnote to his filmography. Okay, now that we've charted his rise, we must delve into the true revolutionary core of his life, his approach to martial arts, fitness, and philosophy. This is the essence of Jeet Kune Do.
JKD was not a style, it was a method of personal liberation through combat. It was a complete repudiation of the static, prearranged nature of the classical arts. Its core principle was adaptability, the idea that the fighter should be like water, taking the shape of whatever vessel it's in.
Which in this case is the fight.
Exactly, the chaotic environment of the fight.
To achieve that level of adaptability, he had to devour techniques from every single discipline. This required incredible intellectual openness.
He studied the traditional Chinese styles, mantis, eagle claw, hung gar, but crucially, he integrated contemporary combat sports that few traditionalists would touch. He incorporated judo, taekwondo, fencing, and even Filipino martial arts like arnis. JKD was essentially the world's first systematic approach to cross-training.
Let's focus on his striking. The influence of Muhammad Ali is often cited. How did he translate Ali's footwork into a martial arts context?
Ali's footwork was revolutionary, light, fast, constantly moving. Lee incorporated that dancing movement to eliminate the rigid, rooted stances common in Kung Fu. This allowed him to maintain distance, pivot quickly, and launch attacks without telegraphing his moves. He trained to make his motion economical, maximum speed and power with minimal wasted movement.
And that search for economical motion led to the development of the non-telegraphic punch, or the acupunch, which he developed with Taekwondo master Jae-hoon Ri. That concept needs some explanation.
It's fascinating. The goal of the acupunch is to eliminate the opponent's ability to react. Most human motions, say, throwing a punch involves a slight, unconscious preliminary muscle movement, a telegraph. A trained eye can spot that fraction of a second prep and start a block.
So if I see your shoulder twitch,
Sure.
I start to react before you've even moved your fist.
Exactly. Lee trained to throw the punch so directly and rapidly that the execution of the strike is finished before the opponent's brain can even register the attack and send the signal to block. It makes the punch virtually unblockable because you're getting hit while your mind is still processing the intent.
That focus on efficiency is also seen in his preferred kicking techniques, like the oblique kick.
The oblique kick, now universally common in MMA, was popularized by Lee. He called it the Jeet tech, or stop kick. It's an intercepting kick aimed at the lead knee or thigh.
Not a knockout blow.
Not at all. It's designed to stop the opponent's forward momentum, break their rhythm, or injure their leg to limit their mobility. It's pure, pragmatic interception.
While he is renowned for striking, you mentioned he also valued the grappling game, which is the most overlooked element of his combat philosophy.
It's massively underrated. Lee knew that a real fight rarely stays upright. He worked diligently on ground fighting. In Seattle and California, he trained with several judo experts like Fred Sato and Wally J., incorporating throws and submissions.
And the connection with Jean LaBelle from the Green Hornet set was crucial for his understanding of submissions.
Absolutely. LaBelle was a major figure in judo and catch wrestling, a submission grappling style known for its devastating neck cranks and joint locks. Lee exchanged his striking knowledge with LaBelle for these specialized grappling techniques. It shows he was dedicated to genuine self-defense, not just cinematic flair.
Yet, despite mastering these techniques, he sometimes omitted them from his films. Was there a conflict between his philosophy and the demands of action choreography?
There was a definite conflict. Lee famously said that grappling was less effective for action choreography. Why? Because it's slow, it happens on the ground, and it's not visually distinctive enough for a mass audience. A cinema audience wants explosive movement.
But the moments he did use grappling in his films were decisive and, well, philosophical statements.
Precisely. He used them for the finish. In the famous prologue of Enter the Dragon, he finishes his opponent, played by Sammo Hung, with an armbar. And in Way of the Dragon, he defeats Chuck Norris with a decisive neckhold, a move inspired by the techniques he learned from LaBelle. He used grappling when the fight required a pragmatic end.
This incredible martial arts expertise was underpinned by a truly revolutionary approach to fitness and physical vigor. He was famous for his physique.
After the Wong Jackman fight, he realized strength and stamina were the real limitations. His training regimen shifted dramatically. He incorporated weight training, not for bulk, but for explosive power. He ran long distances for cardio and constantly stressed flexibility. He was 5'8" nettas, about 141 pounds, with an incredibly low body fat percentage.
And his dedication extended deeply into nutrition, which was highly unusual for martial artists of that era.
He was decades ahead of his time. He compared his body to a high-performance sports car engine. He got into health foods, high-protein drinks, vitamin supplements. Crucially, he practiced dietary discipline. He avoided empty calories like baked goods and refined flour. He also famously disliked dairy, favoring Asian cuisine: vegetables, rice, fish.
But the element that truly separated him was the mental and spiritual dimension, the philosophical search that informed every kick and punch.
This is key. He stressed that mental and spiritual preparation are fundamental. He was a dedicated meditator. His personal library was enormous, filled with hundreds of books on Eastern and Western philosophy. He wasn't just absorbing fighting techniques, he was seeking metaphysical truth.
Who were his primary philosophical influences?
His Western influences ranged from Plato and Descartes to David Hume. He synthesized this with Eastern thought, the Taoist principles of Lao Tzu, and the deep psychological insights of the Indian mystic Jiddu Krishnamurti.
How did Krishnamurti, a major influence, relate to JKD?
Krishnamurti was highly critical of organized systems and gurus. He advocated for radical self-inquiry and direct experience. This resonated deeply with Lee's belief that styles and fixed techniques were limitations. JKD was his combat expression of Krishnamurti's non-dogmatic path to self-knowledge.
So all knowledge ultimately led to self-knowledge.
That was his core belief.
Yet, despite integrating Taoist and Buddhist principles like flow, he maintained a strict atheism.
That's one of the great contradictions. John Little, who cataloged his extensive notes, confirms Lee was an atheist. When asked about belief in God, he stated plainly, "To be perfectly frank, I really do not." He saw the spiritual element not in a deity, but in self-mastery.
And this philosophical paradox, the flow, the darkness, the self-inquiry, was evident even in the poetry he wrote.
He wrote extensively in a free verse style. Linda Lee Cadwell noted that his poetry often reflected a darker mood, exploring the unexposed parts of the psyche. This mirrors the paradox of yin and yang, which is central to JKD. You must be simultaneously yielding and aggressive. This duality is immortalized in his most famous quote, "Be formless, shapeless, like water."
The physical mastery and philosophical depth we've discussed define his life, but his legacy is ultimately frozen in time by one defining event: his sudden controversial death in 1973.
It remains a true mystery, fueled by conspiracy theories. The first warning sign came on May 10, 1973, 2 months before his death, when he collapsed during a voiceover session for Enter the Dragon.
That collapse sounds terrifying.
It was. He suffered severe headaches and epileptic seizures. He was rushed to a hospital in Hong Kong where doctors diagnosed cerebral edema brain swelling.
Brain swelling.
They successfully reduced the swelling with a drug called mannitol. A brain scan in the U.S. later diagnosed him with a convulsive disorder, but he was released and resumed work.
A temporary reprieve, followed by the fatal day, July 20, 1973. We need to walk through the details established at the coroner's court.
Lee spent the day planning. He met producer Raymond Chow to discuss the script for Game of Death. Around 5 p.m., they went to the apartment of his colleague, the actress Betty Ting. They kept discussing the script, and then Lee complained of a headache.
And that's when he took the fatal medication.
Yes, he took a painkiller called exhaustive. It contained two primary compounds, aspirin, and a sedative called prominence. He decided to take a nap.
And he never woke up.
Raymond Chow left, expecting to meet him for dinner later. When Chow returned around 9:45 p.m., he discovered Lee unresponsive. They couldn't wake him. They called a doctor, an ambulance. But he was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. He was just 32.
The autopsy was conducted by Dr. Donald Tier, a senior British pathologist. What were the key official findings?
The autopsy confirmed severe cerebral edema. His brain had swollen dramatically, increasing by 12.5%. The official verdict reached by the coroner's court was death by misadventure.
Misadventure, attributed to what?
To a hypersensitive reaction to the compounds in exhaustive, specifically the meprobamate. The tragic, ambiguous detail here is that Lee had taken that exact medication before without issue. This ambiguity immediately created a void that speculation rushed to fill.
Beyond the completely unsubstantiated rumors like triads or a curse, the medical community continued to search for a more precise physiological mechanism. What about the drug element that was brought up later?
It was highly sensationalized. Posthumous letters revealed he'd occasionally requested various drugs. However, pathologists explicitly ruled out cannabis, which was found in his stomach, as a cause of death. The U.S. Armed Forces Institute of Pathology confirmed they couldn't link cannabis intoxication to the edema. The cause had to be more subtle.
Okay, so let's discuss the first major competing medical theory, the heat stroke hypothesis from 2018. What evidence made this theory compelling?
Matthew Pauly, the author who championed this theory, consulted modern medical experts. They suggested the cerebral edema was likely caused by heat stroke, a condition poorly understood in 1973. And the critical, devastating piece of evidence linking Lee to poor thermal regulation was his prior cosmetic surgery.
Wait, a cosmetic surgery?
Yes. In late 1972, Lee had his underarm sweat glands removed.
Why?
He believed that underarm sweat was unphotogenic on film. The tragic irony is that this procedure may have severely compromised his body's ability to cool itself in the hot Hong Kong summer. The painkiller he took, exhaustive, can also inhibit the nervous system's ability to respond to overheating. The theory suggests the combination of overexertion, poor thermal regulation, and medication led to fatal heat stroke.
It's a powerful connection. The desire for a flawless cinematic image potentially contributing to his physical vulnerability. And then, in 2022, kidney researchers proposed the hyponatremia hypothesis.
Right, and this is a very specific medical conclusion. Hyponatremia is essentially water intoxication. It's a condition where there is an insufficient concentration of sodium in the blood. If sodium levels drop too low, water rushes into cells, including brain cells, causing them to swell, which is cerebral edema.
So why would Bruce Lee, who is extremely fit, be at risk of this?
The researchers pointed to several converging risk factors. Lee was known for excessive water intake. He avoided refined flour and dairy, potentially limiting his salt and electrolyte intake. Furthermore, they noted that things like alcohol and cannabis, which was in his stomach, can impair the kidney's ability to excrete excess water.
So he just couldn't process the fluid.
Essentially, they concluded he died because his kidneys could not handle the excess liquid in his system. His final symptoms, headache, fatigue, coma, closely matched known fatal hyponatremia cases.
And finally, a very recent conclusion in 2025 suggesting sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, or SODI.
Yes. A Hong Kong TV program consulted medical experts who ultimately concluded that SUDT was the most likely cause after ruling out drug allergies and other causes. SUDT is often the cause of death in people with seizure disorders where no other cause can be found.
And he had that seizure 2 months before.
Exactly. Given his collapse and diagnosis of a convulsive disorder just 2 months earlier, it is a highly plausible theory. It suggests the official verdict may have missed the underlying neurological condition, perhaps to protect the public image of the global star.
It's remarkable how many plausible scenarios surround a single event, but the ambiguity itself just feeds the global mythology. Let's turn now to that legacy, his enduring cultural impact, starting with his widely accepted title as the father of mixed martial arts.
His claim to that title is undeniable. He is universally regarded as the most influential martial artist of all time, largely because JKD provided the intellectual blueprint for modern combat sports.
How explicitly did JKD become the MMA blueprint?
UFC founder Dana White made the connection explicit. He said Lee advocated that the perfect style was no style. You take a little something from everything, you take the good things from every different discipline, use what works, and you throw the rest away.
That's MMA.
That is the exact non-negotiable requirement for MMA. The blending of striking, grappling, and customized technique. JKD was just MMA 30 years ahead of its time.
We can see his techniques directly influencing modern champions.
Absolutely. The oblique kick he popularized is now a staple, famously used by fighters like John Jones. Other champions like Anderson Silva and Conor McGregor routinely cite Lee as a foundational inspiration for their fluid movement and willingness to innovate.
His influence even crossed into traditional boxing.
It did. Sugar Ray Leonard studied Lee's films to perfect his jab speed, and the acupunch that Lee developed with Jane Rhee was later taught to Muhammad Ali, who successfully used it to knock out Richard Dunn in 1975.
Wow.
Mike Tyson summed up the feeling of the 70s by saying, everyone wanted to be Bruce Lee.
Beyond martial arts, his impact on breaking racial barriers in Hollywood is perhaps his most lasting sociological contribution.
It cannot be overstated. Bruce Lee fundamentally challenged and changed the portrayal of Asians in American films. Before Lee, the prevalent image was the emasculated, often comical, Asian male stereotype. Lee, through his strength, intelligence, and charisma, demonstrated that Asian men could be tough, strong, and sexy.
A symbol of pride and power.
Exactly. And his success was built initially through non-traditional audiences. Because Hollywood was slow to embrace him, his films played predominantly to Black, Asian, and Hispanic communities. The sources confirm that in the 70s, within Black communities, his popularity was second only to Muhammad Ali.
So he was a pioneering non-white star in a segregated Hollywood.
He was. Rapper LL Cool J noted that for many non-white American children, Lee's films were the first time they had seen a non-white action hero just dominating the screen.
And his influence didn't stop at film. It permeated global pop culture across comics, music, and video games.
Oh, Enter the Dragon immediately launched the global kung fu craze. In comics, he inspired Marvel's Stan Lee, who saw him as a real-life superhero, leading directly to characters like Shang-Chi and Iron Fist. Stan Lee himself said any martial arts character created since the 70s owes their origin to Bruce Lee.
The impact on the nascent video game industry seems almost foundational.
It is elemental. His films, especially the structure of Enter the Dragon and Game of Death, were the direct foundation for two major video game genres. The first major beat-em-up, Kung Fu Master from 1984, was based on Game of Death.
Climbing the tower.
Exactly. And the structure of Street Fighter was entirely based on the premise of an international martial arts tournament inspired by Enter the Dragon. Consequently, nearly every major fighting game franchise features a character modeled directly after Bruce Lee.
And we even see this influence reflected in music and global symbolism.
Absolutely. Early breakdancing pioneers in the 70s incorporated his movements into moves like the windmill, and perhaps the most poignant tribute is a statue of him in Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina, citing him as a powerful, unifying symbol against the ethnic divisions that plagued that region.
Finally, his family continues his profound artistic and martial legacy.
Tragically, his son, Brandon Lee, who was also a promising actor, died in an accident on the set of The Crow in 1993 at age 28. But his daughter, Shannon Lee, actively promotes JKD. She was integral in reviving his unproduced The Warrior concept, which finally became a successful TV series.
And there's a biopic in the works.
Yes. The filmmaker Ang Lee is set to direct a biopic on Bruce Lee, starring his own son, Mason Lee. The legacy of the dragon absolutely endures.
We've traced Bruce Lee's life from his contested heritage, which caused him to be seen as a foreigner in Hong Kong, to his pivotal American education and the existential crisis of the Wong Jackman fight that forced the creation of Jeet Kune Do.
We've examined his explosive, brief film career that made him the first global Chinese film star. And we've grappled with the complex truth of his death, the official verdict, the tragic irony of the heat stroke hypothesis, and the subtle physiological mechanisms proposed by the hyponatremia and CSUD theories.
What ultimately emerges is the reality that his physical mastery was completely inseparable from his intellectual journey.
He didn't just practice martial arts, he wrestled with Plato, Lao Tzu, and Krishnamurti, seeking to understand the nature of reality and self-expression. JKD was merely the practical application of his belief that all knowledge ultimately led to self-knowledge. He taught that the greatest style was no style, because a true artist must transcend the limitations of form.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the learner, to carry forward.
If Bruce Lee's life was defined by the constant elimination of self-imposed and external limits, refusing to be confined by race, a style, or an expectation, how can you apply his most famous philosophical quote to your own search for knowledge and truth?
What is the limitation? A mental block, a rigid definition, a preconceived notion that you need to eliminate today to find your own way of no way, to stop being defined by categories and instead to be formless, shapeless like water.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.